and to September 29th, another learning journey with the healing journey. Yes, we thank you. We are the healing journey, and we're also on a learning journey. We are here to advocate, inform, educate, and support you on this journey. Lee and I started this 501c3 because we went through so much. So, from our lessons learned, we never wanted another loved one to go through what we went through. So, we're here to walk with you on this journey and to educate you and support you through it. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening, Lynn. Good evening, our Facebook audience, our YouTube guests. It's so pleasant to be here again on this fall afternoon.
Yes, thank God it's not as hot as it has been. A little bit cooler. So we're going to get right into it today. And please check our website because we do have some upcoming events. We do have our race that's coming up, our annual race in January. And this year we are looking for in-kind sponsorship. So please do that. And we have a special guest with us this evening without further delay, Dr. Dawn Misquiston. How do you pronounce that last name?
It's McQuiston.
McQuiston, okay. I just want to make sure. And we are so honored to have her with us today. She is the professor of psychology, and she's going to talk about wrongful convictions. And Lee, would you go ahead and introduce our guest, please?
I certainly will. Dr. Dawn McQuiston is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and an associate coordinator in the pre-law program college. She is director of the South Carolina Innocence Initiative and a psychologist with expertise in the intersection of psychology and her work is interdisciplinary, integral of cognitive and social psychology, public policy and the law, and criminal justice reform. Her research includes courtroom decisions, the reliability of testimony, the care and trauma experienced by juries and judges after trials, and judges' interpretation of newly discovered evidence when considering post-conviction relief petitions. I like to say right here, don't give up hope. Dr. McQuiston has many irons that she may run the consulting business and often speaks of the psychology behind witness perception. Testified in criminal trials and consulted on hundreds of other involving murder, assault, robbery, presenting scientific research and evidence. She stands on the side of fair and will make you rethink many assumptions about the conduct of jury trials and how they are studied. She's spoken around the country, and she's here tonight with your healing journey to speak to the caregivers, to the loved ones, to the friends and family of the new or recently incarcerated. Dr. McQuiston, thank you for accepting the invitation at our table and to speak on wrongful conviction and whatever is on your mind.
Of course. No, thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Yes. So, what exactly is a wrongful conviction? People might, want to know how are there wrongful convictions?
That's a big question to start with. I think that's the ultimate question. I would say that there's a lot of factors, both within the criminal justice system and outside of it, that can lead to someone who did not commit the crime being arrested, being implicated, being arrested, being charged, going through a trial, and being found guilty. And so there's really a list of factors that it does come down to. We're able to look at the thousands of wrongful convictions that we know about. And now that we know that somebody is innocent, we can go back and look at, well, we know that if the person is innocent, all of the evidence against them was faulty. So what was that evidence? So we really have a huge database of these cases, and now we can add up, well, what's the biggest contributing factor? What's the second biggest? So it comes down to a list of, between 5 and 10 main contributors. And one of those contributors is what my expertise is in, and that's the psychology of eyewitness identification. And so there's lots of circumstances under which an eyewitness might misidentify someone. And so that's one of the leading causes of someone being convicted based on that faulty evidence. People also give a confession falsely more often than you think would happen, due to, for example, the nature of a police interrogation. There's also some problems that we now know about as science advances. We know that there's problems with forensic science, with some of the forensic sciences. So faulty forensic methods might lead to someone being wrongfully convicted. There may be issues with any of the attorneys involved. Evidence not being, you might have heard the term Brady violations. Brady, so the releasing discovery when evidence should be released. So those are some of the main factors when we think about what is it that's leading to a person being wrongfully convicted that's innocent. What researchers are now starting to look into, that has not received as much attention as it should have, is there's a lot of people who are pleading guilty. So it's not someone who was found guilty in a trial, but people who are innocent who are pleading guilty for one reason or another, although they're innocent. So there's a lot of there could be coercion there for some reason. So that's a contributing factor as well. So those are really kind of the main factors that might have someone land in prison who shouldn't be there.
Wow. When you're talking about this, I'm a trauma specialist. So the psychological trauma of the family that's watching this and the person who is wrongly convicted, I'm sure that there's a lot of trauma involved with this. When you look at the chronic stress and you're looking at, the children's mental health and you're looking at the shock and the grief, all of that is a combination that can really paralyze the family as well as the person being convicted.
Of course. Yes, I think that that's something that often gets lost in this.
Yeah.
That the families who are involved, the actual, when someone's been wrongfully convicted, there was most likely a crime that happened. I mean, sometimes there are no crime cases.
Yes.
For example, what might have been a child dying of an illness. Someone thinks that child was harmed when in fact there was no crime committed, and yet someone is put in prison for that. So, the families of the real victims who thought that the right person was in prison, and it turns out that no, the perpetrator is still on the loose. So even the victim's family, the defendant's family, it goes pretty far. Yeah.
How did you get into this line of work in South Carolina? What led you into this?
Sure. In my graduate training, I was lucky enough to work with an expert in the field of eyewitness identification, and it wasn't necessarily an emerging science, but it was relatively new. It was at the time when people really started talking about the Innocence Project in the 90s. And we started to find out that eyewitness identification was the number one reason at the time that people were wrongfully convicted. So I started doing research. And when I became a professor, I was still doing this research. I became one of the, it's a small area to work in. And I started getting phone calls from lawyers asking me to help them in their cases that they thought they had someone, they were a defense attorney, someone had been arrested. they swear that they weren't the perpetrator, but there was an eyewitness implicating them. So they wanted my help to try to come in and explain to a jury and the judge, well, what are all, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know if the person is guilty or not, but I can at least give you some information about the circumstances under which eyewitnesses can be wrong. So that's for the jury to figure out. So started doing a lot of that work when I was on the faculty in Arizona. And then I started to work with the Arizona Justice Project, which was one of the kind of innocence projects in Arizona connected to the law school. And I would come and just sit in on their meetings and learn about their cases. I was really there just as a spectator. And I was so interested in the work that the post-conviction work that they were doing. And then they started asking me to get involved to teach their students, their law students, more about eyewitness evidence. So then I started teaching law students more, getting involved in law schools. Then I moved to South Carolina. And what I realized was there was no nonprofit focused on innocence work. There were no law schools that were focusing on investigating innocence work. But yet I was continuing to do my work with lawyers, and I started increasingly getting calls to testify work on and testify in post-conviction hearings when one of the first steps is for the person to try to get a hearing in front of a judge and talk about newly discovered evidence. So I started to testify in some of those hearings. And so thinking about my own expertise, what I bring to it, my own work, along with the combination of there not being any real innocent effort and no infrastructure for that, I wanted to start making some noise about it. I, at the time, was collaborating with the Innocence Clinic at the Wake Forest Law School. That's kind of the closest that I could get was at Wake Forest in Raleigh, North Carolina, or not Raleigh, but Winston-Salem. So I was going there. I was helping the students a little bit with talking about their cases. I was teaching once a semester, but I really wanted to bring it to South Carolina. And so I decided to just kind of take my own knowledge and expertise, and knowing a lot of lawyers around the state who really wanted to see movement in the innocence space. I started an organization at Wofford College. And of course, I'm not a lawyer, and so there are limits to what I can do, but I started an organization that where the students, very passionate students, we have a lot of students who want to be lawyers, that we could start to educate the Wofford community and the Spartanburg community, and whoever wanted to kind of come to the events that we were putting on, just to educate and advocate for people, and really have students, the next generation of lawyers and community members learn about this problem. And what I'm hoping is that eventually there will be something like this at the 2 law schools in South Carolina. But for now, my students have started to collaborate just this semester. They started collaborating with the North Carolina Center on Actual Innocence. They are trusting us with some of their cases. So I have a small group we're starting this semester to start to help them a little bit with some intake and reviewing trial transcripts and working on real cases. So that's very exciting.
Wow, this is so interesting that,
Thank you.
South Carolina is one of those places that needed this.
That's
And
right.
you were the one chosen to bring it there. That is so awesome. So awesome how
Thank
you
you.
get involved with this. And so there's so much to learn about the justice system. And in times like these, people need to learn all that they can. And how you're
Yeah.
teaching this to the new wave of attorneys that are
Right.
being, should we say being birthed, because they're
That's
going to
right.
hear tomorrow.
There's a lot of Wofford College is known for having a lot of pre-law students who go on to become lawyers and stay in the state, practice in the state. And so that is the hope, that this can inspire some of these students who were going to go to law school anyway, but they weren't necessarily sure what area they were going to practice in, that maybe they'd like to go into criminal law. And it might be tempting to think that, well, we need some good defense attorneys who are going to defend people who are potentially falsely accused. But what we really need are prosecutors or solicitors, as they're called in South Carolina,
Yeah.
who understand these issues and understand that this can happen.
It's so interesting. Lee, did you have any questions?
I just was just thinking, I wanted to know if your students are allowed, when they're working with the cases or so, are they allowed in the courtroom, um, maybe as a to view or present things, or do they just give it to the lawyers when you're working with cases?
That's a great question. So they will just be giving it to the lawyers. But the cases that they're working on are people who are currently incarcerated. And so, of course, these inmates are hoping to get a hearing. And since we have just now started on this work, I think your question is really a great one, because I hope that they will perhaps eventually be able to sit in on a hearing involving a case that they worked on. So we have our first two cases. We just got them a week ago, and I've got a small group of students that I've divided into two groups, and hopefully they've been busy reading all the materials because they have a meeting with me next week to check in on how the progress is going. But we're really learning this together. I've not actually ever worked on cases before, so it's a bit of trial and error this semester. So they have steps in which they need to follow in reviewing the case and summarizing transcripts and eventually putting a memo together and making some recommendations. And, I'm really proud of them. And since this is the first semester, I hope it goes well. And I think this could be something really great for some students to be involved in who are, whether they're intending to go to law school or not. This is real legal advocacy work. You don't have to be a pre-law student or headed to law school. You just need to be passionate about justice.
Yes.
And
Yes.
want to help make a difference.
Yes. And I think that's what Lee and I got into this, through your pain, sometimes your purpose is birthed. And Lee and
Right.
I got into this, to really, advocate, get into that social justice. We know there are so many changes that need to be made.
That's right.
There are over 5 million people that are fighting the criminal justice system right now. And that's a lot of people. So, we look at years ago when they didn't have the DNA and wrongful convictions were there. So
Right.
now the DNA is coming,
Yep.
and that can supersede the eyewitnesses.
That's right.
So do you go hand in hand with that? Say, for instance, there was an eyewitness, but the DNA does not match. Do you touch
That's a
on
great
anything like
question.
that?
That's a great question. I have read some of the literature on that because one of the tricky things with eyewitness identification is that jury members are really persuaded by, there's hardly anything more persuasive to a jury than a witness saying, that's the person who robbed me. That's the person who I saw commit that crime, or that's the person I saw commit the murder. There's hardly anything more persuasive than that. And why would you doubt that? Someone who says it with conviction, who thinks that they probably saw the right person, or they think they identified the right person. We're not necessarily talking about eyewitnesses who are lying. We're talking about eyewitnesses who could be honestly mistaken. And so that's persuasive to a jury. So there's been some research looking at, well, what about if there's DNA evidence? Yeah. And so people really trust eyewitnesses. They really trust eyewitnesses, and DNA. You would think that might be the thing that will overcome it. But that you have to think about when juries are listening to people on the stand, seeing a witness who may have been the victim. That's different testimony versus seeing perhaps a forensic scientist explaining some things that you may or may not fully understand, rightly so. So That's part of the problem with overcoming eyewitness identification. Yes.
You mentioned something that, that I wanted to bring up. You mentioned that some people go ahead and just plead guilty. Do you think that's because of the lawyer, or why do you think people would go ahead and just plead guilty when they're not?
There's so many reasons that that happens.
Okay.
One of the things that people talk a lot about is the discretion that prosecutors have.
Okay.
Some people argue that they have quite a lot of power.
Mhm.
And there have been situations where a person is threatened with a host of charges.
Mhm.
And the way that the plea then happens is, well, if you take this to a jury, this is what you're going to be charged with. But if you'll just take this plea, we'll bring that way down.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons. We know that it is legal for the police to lie about evidence.
Mhm.
So the police can tell a suspect
Mhm.
that they found their fingerprints at this place, or there was so they can fabricate evidence, and that can have a real psychological effect on somebody who then decides, my best bet is to plea. There can be just some coercion there otherwise that
Mhm.
is potentially illegal.
Mhm.
And I think if you're talking about someone who has never been in trouble with the law, they are absolutely terrified.
Yes.
They are
Yes.
terrified, and they're willing to do whatever they can to try to lessen the impact. If you take us to trial, you may end up with 20 years, but if you
Mhm.
just plead to this thing, we'll give you 1 year and then you'll be done. And for someone who's innocent and terrified and feels like they have no way out, that probably sounds like a good deal to them.
I can identify with that. I
So
can identify with that.
people
Yes.
researchers are starting to talk a lot more about this whole category of people, that all of those factors that I talked about don't apply to. It's
Yes.
it's people that just took a plea.
It's a
Right.
form of manipulation.
Of course it is.
It's that form of manipulation. And like you said, for someone who's never done anything wrong, they may talk without legal counsel.
Of course.
They're not, we try to educate people on Miranda rights. Do not say anything until your attorney, don't talk, don't sign, don't do these things. So we
Yeah.
want to get that out to people because that's very, very important. And all of
Yeah.
that can be used against.
Of course, scholars in the field of false confessions,
Yes.
there's been a lot of research on this, and they say that people who are innocent think that innocence is its own defense. Well, I'm innocent, that is my defense.
Hmm.
But we know that's not the case. And there are certain groups of people who are sensitive to giving a false confession. When you look at the cases in which false confessions have happened, these are people who waived their Miranda rights.
Hmm.
These are juveniles.
Hmm.
These are people that might have some kind of intellectual disability.
Hmm.
So you really can boil it down to some very concrete things about why false confessions even happen. But yeah, to your point, that's one of the big reasons that people falsely confess, is because they waived their Miranda rights.
And also the economic hardship, the cost of legal fees.
Absolutely.
They don't have the
Absolutely.
money. They don't want to put that pressure on their family and things of that nature. It's so interesting when you're talking about this and the psychology of the whole, gamut of what goes on.
Of
Are
course.
you,
And
are you welcomed into the state with this program?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. Yes, I've had, I'd like to think so.
Yes.
I've had a ton of support
Wonderful.
from the defense community. When word got out that I was starting this thing that I didn't quite know what it would end up being, starting to make some noise at Wofford College, because because I had done my own work, expert witnessing and consulting around the state for the last 13 years in South Carolina, a lot of attorneys knew me. And so word got out through various listservs that I was starting this work. And attorneys from all over the state started to contact me saying, this is amazing. Let me know how I can help. And it was really through their help and their guidance that I was able to start this work, because I really did rely on them. I'm a little bit of an outsider since I am not a lawyer. I don't have a law degree. And because I've only really been involved, sure, I teach about these things. I've been in the courtroom, but I'm not an expert in the law per se. So I really wanted advice on where should I go with this and what should I tackle? And so I've had some attorneys who have really served in kind of an advisory capacity, and I couldn't have done it without them. Yeah.
That's so awesome. With
Yes.
the work that you're doing, do you, I don't know if you've tracked this, but there's hope, there's advocacy, and there's resilience. Have you tracked anything about more loved ones and caregivers getting involved in, you know, innocence projects and things of that nature because their loved one might be stuck in, you know, the
Yeah, I haven't. And I feel like meeting you both, I'm hoping can actually open the door for that. I do know that there's an amazing organization in North Carolina called Healing Justice.
Okay. Healing Justice.
Healing Justice. And it was started by a woman who, back in the 90s, I think, falsely implicated and identified. So we're talking about an eyewitness situation. She falsely identified someone as being her rapist. And he went to prison, and then DNA developments were made, and they were able, and he had been saying, I was not the perpetrator of this crime. They finally were able to set him free because of DNA evidence, and they got the right perpetrator. And once he got out of prison, he and the real victim met each other, and they developed a relationship and started giving talks together about the impact of all of this on him, on her family, on his family. They wrote a book together. And so she started an organization called Healing Justice that does exactly this, helps support families and exonerees. Yes.
You know, that's awesome. That's similar. It sounds a little bit, I don't know if you're familiar with restorative justice and their practices. And,
Yeah.
you know, it sounds a little bit like that, getting the families together.
Yes.
And that's awesome.
Yeah.
I just thank you because you have informed us and educated us on just so much that's going on in South Carolina, and it's welcomed. It's welcome.
Thank you.
That
Thank
makes
you.
us feel so good. And I thank you for the work that you do in this social justice movement, because it's so much work to do. And you have just, you have just rolled up your sleeves, and you're so good at this. So I just thank you. And I thank you also because we're in the same field of psychology.
Yes.
So, I always like to see what makes people tick, why they do what they do. And you just explained some things to me about, why people just go ahead and
Right.
Say I'm guilty. So I
Well,
thank
thank you for hosting me here. And
Yeah.
I'm lucky that this is the direction that my work has led me. I'm
Yeah.
so glad that I work in a field where I can apply the things that I've learned and apply the science to some advocacy work in the justice system. I do think that it's needed. And so I appreciate being able to educate students about these issues but also the community. So thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Lee, did you have any final remarks?
There's so much that comes under that umbrella of that we put under the mental aspect of it that kind of goes with the reason why some of these crimes happen or so. And the work that you do in South Carolina is so needed. And I'm so glad that it's here because we lag a little bit in so many areas or so.
Right.
But the work that you do can help the attorney. So I'm so happy that they welcome you,
Yeah.
all that you're doing to get to the bottom of the things that are happening around Carolina. And one other thing I just want to say in reference to, we were talking about taking plea deals as opposed to going to trial or so, and how you're a little bit afraid of stuff and you're scared because when it's your first time, you just don't know what to expect and
Right.
all your horror stories. So you just kind of just say, well, let me take the lesser of two evils.
Of course.
We don't think about the all of it because we don't know and stuff, but we think about the fact that that plea deal means that you're pleading guilty
Yep.
and going to um, you're going to carry this the rest of your life pretty much.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That is going to follow you. That's right.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
something. That's something. So
Yeah.
we just thank you. We would love to hear how your group is expanding and the things that you're doing. So we just thank you so much. And we're going to
Thank
keep
you.
in touch with you.
I hope so.
And thank you. Would you like to have a final statement for the loved ones or the caregivers of those wrongly accused? What advice could you give them?
Sure. What I'd like to say is there are scientists that are working on this stuff. So I would like to advocate for science. For 30, 40 years, researchers are really working on how to improve police procedure and other aspects of things that are happening in the courtroom and courtroom dynamics. So scientists are working really hard behind the scenes to try to improve a lot of these processes. And it's often not easy for us to get the word out.
Yes.
We go to our conferences full of scientists. We teach in classrooms, but getting this information out and talking about what we do to the community, I think is where we could do a little bit better. And so I would love to see the community perhaps talking to and inviting scientists and researchers, professors onto programs like this to talk to the community about what they're up to.
Yes, definitely. I just thank you again. And, thank you for the work that you're doing. I can't thank you enough because my son is in South Carolina. So I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. So the other ones that are coming up, maybe
Right.
they have a chance. So,
of course. Well, I'm so honored. I'm honored you would
Yes.
include me in this conversation, and I hope to be back.
Thank
And
you so much. Thank
Dr.
you.
If there's someone that wanted to reach or so, can we give them information as to how to reach you and some that we can perhaps give to them?
Of
if they want
course.
to?
Of course. Yes, my best way to reach me is by my email address. And it's my full name at Gmail. So it's Dawn and then a period, McQuiston at gmail.com. That's the best way to reach me. And of course, currently, since there's no Innocence Project nonprofit in South Carolina, the North Carolina Center that I'm working with, they are taking all of the cases. And so somebody could reach out to the North Carolina Center on Actual Innocence. You can find them online.
Okay. Because we do have people from all states that are listening or so, but we certainly want to reach out to you.
Absolutely.
They
Yeah.
can.
Yes.
You're
Thank you so much. And until next time, we thank you. And listen, everybody, go to our website and look at the posts that we do put on here for you to educate and inform you. Until we see you again, thank you and good